Welcome back to Between the Levees. I'm joined today by my first ship pilot, Captain David Shirah. He and his family go back in this industry over 230 years, so we have a fair amount to cover. But first, for Christmas vacation, we find Captain David where this morning?
I'm up in the mountains in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. We typical boatman family. We had to kind of gather everybody up and get them as best we could to central location. Not everybody could make it, so we've got a couple of family members out stranded on boats, but most of us are here in Gatlinburg, so we're getting together, eating some good food, and enjoying a mountain Christmas up here.
Where is everybody scattered these days?
Well, I've got with me here. I've got my dad, Dave Sr. He's retired ACBL captain. I've got my father-in-law, Captain Don Ryder. He's retired NOBRA Ship Pilot, and then I've got Goat, my youngest son, Dayton. Everybody calls him Goat. He's a senior cadet up at the Great Lakes Maritime Academy in Traverse City, Michigan. So he came down. He's right in the middle of studying for finals. He starts licensing next week up at the academy. And then I've got my daughter here. She's an engineer and lives in Houston with her husband, who's also an engineer. And then my son Cannon, he's a graduate of the Massachusetts Maritime Academy. He works, he's the chief officer on the Viking, Mississippi. He's on the boat. And then his wife, Cassidy, is a graduate of the Texas A&M Maritime Academy. She's in between jobs, in between work weeks. So she's off the boat, but catches the boat, I think, tomorrow, the next day. She works for Willie Biso Towing. And then Goat's girlfriend is a graduate of Texas A&M, and she is somewhere in the Pacific on an OSV.
Quite the representation of a cross-section of this industry here, bud. Well,
Yep.
We spoke briefly a few months ago in an introductory call preparing for this very meeting, and you told me that your family history in this industry began, I think, in the late 1700s. So
Yep.
if you can, fill me in on that history of how your family was involved and has been involved over all these years.
Well, the history goes back. My six-time great-grandfather was born in Baltimore. He served in the War of 1812 in the U.S. Navy, and after the War of 1812, he transferred into the lighthouse service. So 3 generations of that family, and that was on my grandmother's side of the family. That was Sprinkle family. They were in the lighthouse service. My grandmother, Inez, was born in the Burwood Southwest Pass Lighthouse in the teens. And the family was tending lighthouses, and they ran the steamboat service boats between the lighthouses, which is where they were passenger service. They carried all the supplies for the lighthouses, and they also carried general cargo. So they ran a packet service kind of between the mouth of the Mississippi River all the way over to Dolphin Island, the Mobile Lighthouse. That's where my great-grandfather passed away at. It was his last assignment. And then that's where my grandfather, Milton D. Shirah, him and 3 brothers had went over there fishing. They were commercial fishermen in Destin, Florida. And the 3 brothers married 3 sisters from Dolphin Island. My grandfather went from there to Canal Barge Line, and he was a pilot and captain at Canal Barge Line for many years. He was on the Stem Winder, the Bull Calf, and then he finished his career over at Smith Tugs, which is now Crescent Towing, and he retired in 1960, passed away in 1980, and then my dad started with Upper Miss in the late 50s, 58 or 59. I think he went to ACBL in 1960, and he was a pilot and master at ACBL from about 1960. He retired in 1996. That's a mouthful.
Indeed, it is. Tell me about growing up with a father that was running line haul tows on the lower.
Yeah, well, it was different. It was, my family back in Destin were commercial fishermen. They owned a Destin bait company. So, it was a wonderful upbringing because, growing up in small town Destin back before it was industrialized and before it was the tourist mecca that it is now. You know, we spent a lot of time on the bait boats. I grew up bait fishing, and of course, you know, back in that era of towboating, this would have been in the early '70s. There were no family boats, so we spent Christmas on the boat every other year, and just about every summer we would the family would go on the boat, or at least I would go on the boat. I was exiled to ACBL boat, and that was my playground. We ran up and down the stairs. We aggravated the cooks. You know, we did everything. It was a completely different way of life than modern towboating is. But you know, that was my summer. There's a picture of me I ran across recently of me in a pair of diapers and between the sticks of the old trade winds. So that was the upbringing. You know, I did that probably until I was preteen, maybe 11, 12 years old. And then I started working more at the bait company and working in that side of the business, probably my late teen years. And then, you know, graduated Fort Walton Beach High School in 1986 and got enrolled in college. And I lasted almost the whole semester at college. Had a desire in my whole being to be out on the Mississippi River, and you know that's what I knew. That's kind of what my calling was. Of course, the family was hell bent on me getting an education, but I did the thing where you leave college, not quit, because when you quit, you raise your hand and go, "Hey, I quit. I'm going to go do something else." I just left college. So at that point, you know, Dad was dead set against me going out on the boats. I had a cousin, Bobby Shirah, who was a captain, longtime captain over at Dixie Carriers. So I can remember making the phone call on the marine operator to Dad saying I'd had a job lined up at Dixie Carriers since he wouldn't let me come on the river on his side. So a couple of days later, I got a Greyhound bus ticket to Cairo, Illinois, and Mom brought me over to the Army Navy surplus store, and we made a sea bag out of an old Army bag and off to the Al Pannier Deckhand Academy. I don't remember how long the bus ride was, but it was like, I don't know, 24-hour bus ride from Fort Walton Beach bus station, Cairo. Of course, I found out years later that that offered Dad an airplane ticket for me, and he insisted on me taking the bus instead. So that's about how that next summer went. Because when he was on the Tom Frazier back then. When I graduated the Deckhand Academy, I really didn't know where I was going to go, but someone came in the middle of the night and woke me up, told me to pack my sack and get on a crew boat. And I went out there about 4 o'clock in the morning and got delivered to the Tom Frazier. Dad was furious. And when I'll tell you, he was mad, like furious. And for 63 days, he tormented me. We chipped that boat from the top of the mast to the water line. We painted everything. He did everything he could do that summer to make me quit. Finally calls, and I wasn't even allowed in the wheelhouse. If I walked in the galley, he was in the galley, he would get up and scrape his plate off into the garbage can and walk out of the galley. That's how it went the first 2 months out there with him. Finally, he calls me up to the wheelhouse one day. He says, "You're hard-headed." He says, "Are you going to quit?" I said, "No, I'm not going to quit, but I'm never coming back to this boat again. I get off this thing, I'm gonna call up there and see if they'll put me on a different boat." And he says, "No," he says, you're gonna stick. If you're gonna make a career out of this, here's the plan." And that day he laid out the plan, and that was it. That was kind of the beginning of my career at ACBL.
Before we get too far into that plan, tell me first, don't know if you remember, of course, being in diapers behind the sticks, but what were your earliest memories of life on boats, and what was the culture maybe of the industry that you knew back then?
Well, it was definitely more of a family oriented feel on the boat. Like my dad had two mates, Randolph and Sarge. I think by the time Dad retired, those guys probably been with him for close to 30 years. Cowboy, there was a deck-end June bug that was with my dad for 20 something years. Tom Hederman was the cook when I was a little kid, and Tom actually got a cancer and passed away in the during that period. And on his deathbed, Dad made his sister, who was a pastry chef in Louisville at the Brown, promised that she would go on the boat and take care of his guys. So when Tom passed away, we inherited Miss Lola, and Miss Lola was on the boat the entire time that I was there, and then for years after I left ACBL. She actually retired when my dad retired. So yeah, so definitely more of a family feel. You know, if somebody got the flu or got a cold or something, everybody would rally around that guy and get him some rest and take care, you know, cover his part of the watch until the guy was back on his feet. So yeah, everybody looked out for each other. It was definitely like family.
Any good stories you can share about those old guys that maybe are no longer able to offer a rebuttal?
Oh man, let me tell you, one of the blessings of my career was, you know, if you think about the towing industry from like 82, 83 until when I started there at 87, that was when they had the big oil crash. So, you know, there was 5 or 6 years that the industry was stagnant, you know, that, you know, it was on hard times. So there was no steersmen, there were no pilots made in that period. So when I came along in 87, they were just, matter of fact, myself and Joe Mac Hamilton's son were the first two apprentices, first two steersmen that kind of went into that program when ACBL finally, you know, they hadn't made pilots for so many years, and we were the guinea pigs. I remember being brought up to Louisville, and they put me through all kinds of psychiatric tests and vision tests and, you know, mental acuity and, you know, just all kinds of tests. I was up there for a whole week because when they re-engaged into the program, they wanted to do it differently and take a more scientific approach to it and everything. So that was a very eye-opening experience, and kind of being the guinea pig of ACBL refiring that steersman's program. And then we were on the Fraser at the time, and that was a blessing also, because when I did, you know, when I got my license, in I think it was November of '89. I got my license. Of course, back then it was a second class operator, and you had to be 19 to get it. And at 21 years old, you could get a first class operator. So I wasn't old enough to get the first class operator's license, so I wound up getting the second class operator's license, which it only took, you know, turning 21 and having not even sea time, but turning 21 to do that. So, you know, really young, getting licensed. It was an operator's license, and yeah, went into the steersman's program. We were running Cairo turnaround trade at the time on the 6,000. So we were in and out of Cairo. We'd run Cairo to St. Louis and Cairo maybe up to Paducah and turn an Ohio boat, and we'd build a lower boat and we'd run with another 6,000 south out of Cairo and go turn an 8,400, and 2 6,000s would jump on an 84 tow and shove it back into Cairo. So, you know, as far as boat handling and getting to do a lot of tow work and fleet work and all that, it was probably definitely the fast track on getting comfortable between the sticks.
Before you moved into the wheelhouse, of course, you said you spent time at a deckhand academy in Cairo. Tell me about arriving on that bus after 24 hours, stepping off that, and did you know what you were walking into?
Not really. No. So back then, ACBL had an office barge up in Cairo. It was the old United States or the America. I forget which one it was. Maybe it was the United States, but it was one of the old 4-stack federal barge line boats that they used as an office up there. They had gutted the engine room out of it. The engine room was the storage room. Miss Pat ran the deck stores for the whole company, or for the Cairo operation. So you made your deck store orders. And then Captain Alpenier was that was his kingdom, the Cairo fleet, and he sat up there. His office was up on in the old captain's room of the, and they named the boat the Alpenier. So now it was the Alpenier, Alpenier on the Alpenier, and yeah, that was his empire up there. He ruled that with an iron fist, and I show up there, and you know, of course, you get picked up in the crew van. The crew van brings you up there, and you know, of course, Al and my father were dear friends, and he recognized the name right away, which wasn't good. Wasn't good because I got just about the same treatment from Al. He was just warming me up for what I was fixing to get from my dad. But you know, we went out every day and with the bull gang and built tow, and you know, you had your little safety classes. They trained cooks there also, so the cooks would be in the galley. They had still operational galley on the boat, so the cooks, you know, they were training cooks at the same time, so they were practicing on you, and you were out there practicing with the bull gang. So you know, the bull gang back then, I don't even know if the bull gangs even exist anymore, but that was, you know, you go out there and do 12 hours with the bull gang, you didn't have any trouble going to sleep that night. That's for sure.
What kind of things were you doing with the bull gang?
Built up. So back then they had a bull gang, what they called it the bull gang. And it was just, you know, probably 8 to 12 guys. That's all they did was built tow. Back then, you know, the line boats would come in, they would drop a tow, pick up a tow, swap rigging, and a lot of cases we'd be out of there in an hour, 2 hours at the most on a turnaround. Probably as efficient or more efficient than what they're doing these days. I've been out of that side of the towing business for a minute, but I can't imagine that they're getting boats in and out of town any quicker than what we used to get out of town.
I've not heard of current day training with any company that's quite like that, but um, how long were you in that school?
I want to say it was probably a 2-week school, but like I said, I got shanghaied with a couple of days left to go, and went straight on the boat. Most of the guys went back home and had some time to think about it, but I got like I said, shanghaied in the middle of the night, and yeah, it was on from there. Absolutely was on. It was funny. I gotta tell a story too. It's like when I was on deck, that time I was on deck, the other deckhands. I mean, it was one of those. It can go either way. You know, if you're a relative of the old man, you can either have the crew not like you very much because they think you're getting some sort of special treatment, or it can go the other way where they're having to try to hide you from the old man because there's so much work happening around you, it bleeds over into them, and they're just, you know, they almost feel sorry for you at the point. So I can remember Randolph, and so I worked call watch all the time, the day 6 to 6 call watch during the day. So they were definitely sick of being around me getting yelled at by him all the time.
Well, fill me in a little bit on those first 2 months out there, and in whatever detail you want. Any good stories, hardships that come to mind? Did he push you to the point of saying, "Okay, screw this"?
Yeah. He did. And I know, and I now understand what he was doing. But yeah, it wasn't good for our relationship. He pushed me pretty hard. But he, you know, looking back on it, he just wanted to make sure he didn't want me to linger. If I was gonna take to it, and if I was gonna be able to do it, and it's what I really wanted to do, we were gonna figure that out that first hitch, or he was gonna send me out of there. And it was good for me too. You know, I came of age, and you know, I probably learned more that 2 months than I have any 2 months since then. And you know, I was appreciative. I was appreciative of the opportunity, and yeah, back then ACBL was a glorious place to work. I mean, you know, that was back in the evil empire era when they were just blowing and going. They were the, you know, biggest company on the river, the fastest growing, and they were just gobbling up companies left and right. It seemed like you know, every quarter there was an acquisition or something happening. So yeah, no, it was a great time to be at ACBL.
Well, walk me through your time on deck going up to the wheelhouse.
Yeah, well, you know, I was on deck, officially on deck probably. Oh, that was 87. spring of '87, and I think I started in the steersman's program January of '90 is when they kicked that off. So yeah, just right at 3 years, and just rode a lot of days. Back then, I think we made. Matter of fact, I know I ran across the other day. I was cleaning out some paperwork, and I found some pay stubs. We made $75 a day back then. $75 a day, and all you could eat. The more you ate, the more you made. So you had to take part of your salary out of the galley every day. And then I found my pay stub for a steersman, and they actually dropped you down to $55 a day as a steersman. So they guaranteed you rode a lot of days as a steersman. You couldn't afford to go home. And no, just had a great time. You know, we during the middle of that period, the whole crew transferred from the Tom Frazier over to the Joe Bob Zine. The Joe Bob Zine came open, so you know, all of a sudden the whole crew turns over to the Joe Bob, and named after the president of the company. Biggest boat in the fleet. She was 9,200 horsepower, triple Alco 251F in it. Yeah, and then that was a whole different you know, animal to deal with. You know, you go from an Alco Jeff Boat 6000, all of a sudden you're on the flagship boat. And it was also during that time that ACBL had started the trap system in watercom. So we were the test boat for trap and watercom. I had taken in high school, weirdly enough, I had taken typing class, and I took a basic computer class, so I knew DOS. So yeah, I spent a lot of time on my knees in the wheelhouse of the Bobzine, but it was rebooting computers and fixing modems. It was all a modem based system and everything. So I probably got a couple hundred miles on my knees in the wheelhouse up there, working on that stuff constantly, and constantly on the phone with IT and all that. So that led into some stuff I did later in my career. But you know, it was just a very good time for going through what I was going through. Enjoyed every bit of it. Rode a bunch of days. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we rode back then. It was 40 and 20 back then most of the time, and you could never get off at 40, and I don't think I ever took 20 off ever. That whole time, from you know, starting to actually getting turned loose in the wheelhouse. Of course, the wheelhouse back then was 30 and 20, so that was always the dream schedule. If you could get turned loose, you can go to that 30 and 20 schedule.
And you said the whole crew. Was your father captain on the Bobzine?
Yeah. He was captain on the Frazier first, and then when he was on the Frazier, he had Raymond Earl Young was the relief captain, and I want to say Raymond Earl might have got the Frazier after that, because I think Terry Boyles wound up being the relief. I think that's when Terry came to the boat. Terry Boyles was relief captain on the Bobzine when we transferred over there. But the rest of the crew came from the Tom Frazier.
And that was all large tows, Cairo down to New Orleans?
Yeah. You know, once we were on the Bobzine, it was all. And back then it was 35 mostly. Back then the river's not as good as it is now, so that was considered a 35 boat most of the time, unless we were dropping for river conditions, and we were 42 or 49 back up in that trade.
Do you have any memories or interesting stories to share from your time on deck between those two boats?
Yeah, there was some things that happened. I'm trying to think back. You know, really a lot of days. I just remember the camaraderie with the crew, and just that coming of age piece. You know, just typical boats and barges. I mean, it's days turn into weeks, and weeks turn into months, and months turn into hitches. And you know, that whole time seems like as I'm thinking about it and looking back on it, not a lot happened. I mean, it was, you know, there was no injuries really. We really took care of the boats at a high level. We hustled when it was time to hustle, and we rode when it was time to ride. Yeah, I think just the people. I think the people are my memories from that 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 era coming up. I can remember Sarge. He was retired Army guy, and Sarge would be on you every day. Take your salt pill. Change your socks. You got clean socks. He'd ask you 5 times a day if you got clean socks on. Don't sit on a timber head. It was just all that quirky. He treated us. He treated us all like we were like little military privates underneath of them and everything. Nothing past them. Room inspections on Sundays. And it was just that kind of life. And then I remember Miss Lola. Once Tom left and passed away, and once we got Miss Lola, she was funny because she was a lady. So you'd have to change shirts to go in the galley if you had on. If you were sweaty and smelly, you had to go knock on her door, and she'd bring you a glass of iced tea or something to the door. You couldn't go in the galley unless you were cleaned up. And then if you missed the meal, she would send somebody to find you. Even if you were already in the rack, she'd send somebody to come find you. And if they had to physically drag you to the galley, you were gonna go eat her food every time. So that's kind of the decking piece of it in a nutshell. Of course, that's over 30 years ago. So I'd say yeah, nothing but fond memories of the decking days.
I was introduced to ACBL in late 2015 when they acquired AEP. I was part of that acquisition.
Mm-hmm.
What I knew of ACBL at that point was Harahan Fleet and Armont Fleet down here. What was the
Merry Christmas, by the way.
You too, sir.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
What was the landscape of ACBL? How were they set up? Obviously, still had a fleet in Cairo, but what was it on the south end?
Well, yeah, you had They were very strong in St. Louis. They'd acquired the assets of St. Louis Ship up there. So you had Brian Christie. I'm trying to remember the senior guy up there. They were running St. Louis. You had Cairo with Cap Now. Of course, the Gulf back then was centered at Harahan, and then you had Sonny Ivy, that was the guy down there. So it was a lot more. I'd say there was a lot less communication, and the different zones seemed to have stronger leadership in each zone. So I think there was less of the top down from Jeffersonville management and more localized. Your tow diagrams, your all that stuff. Of course, all that stuff when I started was all single sideband. So you did traffic in the morning on single sideband and traffic in the evenings on single sideband, and then there was less dependent on the computers and kind of more localized to the vessels and to the Gulf Division, Cairo Division, or the Upper Division. Are you picking up some background noise?
No. This is me looking off, thinking, what the hell can I ask next? No, you're coming through clear.
We got the house next to us has a party going on, so it's getting noisy over there. But yeah, as long as that's not bothering you, it's fine.
No, I'm not picking up anything.
Okay.
I look off this way out my window, thinking, what the hell can I ask next, and how can we steer this story?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you at that point. You talk about the acquisition. So I was there to like the Sioux City, New Orleans acquisition. They did all of Blessie's towing above Baton Rouge. So we had all the 300s from Blessie that were in fleet. I was there for the Valley Line acquisition. That was different. That shocked. I was already turned loose in the wheelhouse at that point. Yeah, that was, and I'll backtrack to the Valley Line acquisition. But so the way it wound up, I told a story about how in the 80s there were long on pilots. Well, all of a sudden, as I'm an apprentice, I go in the steersman's program, and I'm on the Bobzine now, and all of a sudden now the whole industry's short on pilots because you just went 6, 7, 8 years nobody made pilots, and all of a sudden they're shorthanded. And I found myself turned loose northbound on the Bobzine. I've been a steersman about a year, when I got turned loose. I got turned loose on the Bobsey northbound, and we'd get to Cairo and they'd put a pilot on, and I'd swap to the front watch and ride south with a post with the old man, and we'd have a posting pilot on that would run the after watch. And I kind of ran call watch then. I try to steer the morning watch, the afternoon watch, and then usually try to stay up to the closest midnight as I could, so I catch all, and I caught all the bridges. You know, I always got up for every bridge and everything. So got myself turned loose, and then we did that put a pilot on, ride south as a steersman for about another 6 months, and we get up there. This was in '90 when the river was popping so hard, and yeah, that was interesting, because I get up there and Carl Cannon calls the boat, and Carl says, "Hey, we don't have anybody to send the boat." It was 50 foot on the Cairo Cairo gauge, and they sent us out of there, and that was my first southbound watch as a pilot. They didn't have anybody to send. Old man agreed that I was ready to go, and I'll never forget it. We're on the anchor fleet there at IC, and I was on watch when we got it faced up, and did the rigging swap, got the headgear out, and I remember backing up on the bobzine and couldn't back slack into the stern cable. And I remember Randolph calling up on the radio. He was my lead man on the watch. He says, "I got it." They all call me Davey. He goes, "I got it, Davey." And he walked on to the head of the boat, and he came back off with a fire axe and walked out and cut the wire on the stern of the tow. And we were southbound. That was my first southbound trip as a turn loose pilot. And yeah, that was interesting. We got it down and didn't hit anything, but I probably learned more on that 4.5-day trip to the Gulf than I did the previous time I'd been on the short time I've been on the river. But that's kind of the way it goes back then. Yeah, and you asked about decking. I do have one interesting. Let me back up just a step back. In '88, I was out there, and that record low river of '88. So that was an interesting, being on deck for that. That was interesting. Of course, you know, they almost lost the channel up at Island 39 and Redmond Bar, and we found ourselves at that location, and we were head boating all the tows down through that section. So we'd go out there, and I was on deck back then. We'd catch a four-part capstan line on every southbound tow, and put out the face wires and let them drive us all the way down into the east bank right there at Redmond Bar. And then they'd come ahead on the boat and steered ahead of those tows around. It was too sharp. It was too dog-legged and sharp, and it was a double flank for most tows to get around there. So we were head boating every tow that went down through there. And I think just about every tow would drive us down within, feet of the bank before we drive out of it and bring the head around. So that was, we did that probably for a solid month, daylight only at that location. So that was, going back to the decking days, I think that'll leave a memory. Every one of those will leave a memory that I'll never forget back from the decking days.
Well, tell me if you can, how steersman training was back in the day. I know these days there's sort of a dependence on Rose Point and systems like that. With the single sideband and with fighting with modems and stuff. I mean, tell me about the systems you used and maybe what the old timers were trying to teach you about reading the river and what was the most challenging bridge you were, transiting, things like that.
Yeah, that's funny. You talk about the matrix of equipment. So we had the single sideband over in the corner. That was when I started. That was the only means of communication. So you had that and the VHF radios. We had two depth sounders, and then we had one of the old Swing Master of Alabama rate of turn indicators, which was built from an old, I think, a B-17 or B-24 gun sight. That's how they made the rate of turn indicators, or the black ones that you used to see on the boats. So two depth sounders, rate of turn indicator, two VHF radios, and a Sperry Mark 24 radar. And that was the single radar. That was the complement of equipment that was on just about all the boats, consistent fleet wide over at ACBL. Later on, I remember when they put the first LORAN when we were on the bobzine with the test boat and all that. I'll get into that, but yeah, that was it. The bar book was the big deal back then. You'd build a bar book. So the way I did mine was I took the lower Mississippi chart. I did one for the upper also, but the lower Mississippi chart, I would take it and I'd go back to they had one of the guillotine paper cutters, and I cut the edges off of it and cut it in half, and I put it in these clear 3-ring binder with those clear sheet protectors, and then you could pull each sheet out and make notes on it and everything. And so I was a thief. I stole everybody I rode with. I would ask for permission to go digging through their bone books, looking for notes and looking for just any kind of information, because it was almost, your bar book was almost like your Bible as far as what you used when you didn't have a lot of depth of knowledge. That bar book was where you kept all your notes and thoughts organized, and hold up spots and sets. And back then it was a big deal to run out behind the islands and dikes, and what it took to cover the dikes, what it took to run the dikes and all that. I think there's a lot less dike running these days because they've raised them so high, but there was a lot of that going on back then. So that was a big piece of it. And like, the old man was funny about the radar. Like, if he'd come up there during the day and you had the radar running, he'd be mad. He'd go up there and turn radar off and tell you he was wasting radar. Don't waste that radar, boy. You're gonna need it. Because if you think back to those old cathode ray tube radars and everything, with the way they had the magnetrons in them, you only got so many hours out of one, and they, so yeah, you actually try to limit the use of the radar. It's unthinkable today in today's culture that you would actually turn a radar off because you're worried about the hours on it. But, they were funny. They were funny about the radars and everything. Funny about the tune on the radar. You had to be careful about the that deal. And then working with the old timers, we raced every watch. Every watch was a race, and you'd come up and at watch change, and you'd negotiate on what you were logging down as the watch change point, because they'd fight you for 1/10 of a mile on every watch. That's just the way it was. We hustled the boats up and down the river. We fought and scratched and dug for every mile we could make. That was almost like a point of pride with the old guys. So that was a good time. I think we had a lot more fun back then than they do now. I think now, what I see now, especially from the job I do now, is like, it's almost like the U.S. Coast Guard and NTSB. They're almost trying to criminalize everything you do. As far as back then, if there was negligence, if you had a bump in the night, or if you had an issue, negligence was simple negligence. You could get fired. You could possibly lose your license. But these days, there seems like oversight's looking for ways to criminalize simple negligence. So that's the biggest change from then to now. It was more of a freewheeling, not that we were unsafe, but it was definitely more of a freewheeling era in the industry. If you're running empty northbound with empties, the deck crew expected to go out there and pull some willow trees off the corners of the tows. If you were running 10, 15 foot off of a string of buoys, you were too wide. So back then there was a definite emphasis on boat handling and how you ran and how you tried to optimize the operation of the boat from point A to point B.
Well, what kinds of skills may you have learned back then that are no longer around?
Well, I think one of the things, definitely traffic management. Like back then, you think about doing traffic management blind, without a rose point, without AIS, where you had to, and there was some gamesmanship back then too. You were constantly negotiating, making jumps and coming down. And the northbound boat lied about his position, trying to get the downbounder to let him make the jump, and based on him knowing that the downbounder was lying about his position, trying to get the guy to hold up and make sure he wasn't in the hole with him. So there was some gamesmanship with that when it was outside boats. Of course, company boats, it was always something different. So there was a much different negotiation sometimes between the company boats and the outside boats. And there was it was good, healthy friction, but there was some friction between the companies. There was definitely that pride of ownership that a captain had towards the company he rowed a boat for.
Speaking of the competitive landscape of the industry at the time, you said ACBL, of course, was the big dog, acquiring companies left and right. Who were the major competitors back then? And
well,
I guess
it was a shock. It was a shock to the whole industry when ACBL bought the Valley Line. Valley Line had been through some hard times, but the '80s were a really funky time for the industry. I think a lot of the companies it fell on hard times. I think a little bit of luck where they were at in their credit cycle and luck and everything. Valley Line had a bunch of accidents, and I think that hurt them. And then where they were positioned in the industry as far as grain versus coal versus liquid, and how diversified they were, I think made a big difference on their ability to survive. But yeah, Valley Line was kind of declining a little bit, but like Arco was always kind of like, we always teased and called them the supermarket boats. They were always immaculate, always, the biggest boats, the prettiest paint jobs. That was always kind of the one of the premier companies out there. Ingram was always a solid, family-owned, well-run company with great equipment. And there was, there's just a lot. One of the things, if you look at the landscape of the companies, if you were to pull up one of the old stack posters that showed all the stacks from the different barge lines from the 70s and 80s, there were a lot of companies out there. But the consolidation that's happened over the last 30 years is incredible. I don't even know if you could make a whole stack poster anymore. All the companies that have just been gobbled up. I mean, between what ACBL did over the years, Ingram's, you think about even Ingram, they took on Riverways, and they took on Tico, they took on a lot of different whole companies, and to me, that's what changed the business a lot too. Marquette always, they were always kind of a tramp company. They pushing other people's barges, but they've completely evolved over the last couple of decades to being a real barge line, from just being more of a trap company pushing other people's barges, which I think they own a significant amount of barges now. So I think a lot of these companies had to grow or get eaten. And I think that's why you see five major companies. And if you look on the liquid side, what Kirby's done, I think there's even been more consolidation on the liquid side. If you look at what's Kirby at, close to 200 vessels these days.
I'm not sure, actually.
Yeah. So that's been a huge change in the industry, just from a guy that's been out of it. And we played with it for a while. We purchased some boats, bought 5 boats out of bankruptcy from North Star, and was actually in the towing business for a minute, and sold a couple, refurbished a couple, bought a different one, and tried to make it a go in the liquid business. But Katrina kind of put an end to that. But it's difficult, to get in to the business these days. You almost have to, go into the fully found charter business with one of the majors, from whether on the liquid side or the dry cargo side.
Well, let's jump back to your career. So you make it to the wheelhouse, you cut loose. I think you said your first southbound trip, you had to get a Fire X and
Fire X. We cut looking back on it, there was other options, but I don't know if those other options were on our minds at that time. But yeah, Randolph went out there and cut the stern wall with a Fire X, and we slid off the anchor fleet. We were southbound, and had a good trip down the river. River was really running. Like I said, I think we had 30. I think they knocked a string off, and I think I want to say a couple days later they dropped another string and rode out on a hot river, and that was it. I remember Carl Cannon, who was just one of my mentors and a dear friend. I remember Carl calling because originally I was only supposed to bring it to Memphis. They were supposed to have somebody to catch the boat in Memphis, and then I remember Carl calling and saying didn't have anybody from Memphis to try to get it to Greenville, and got it to Greenville. And I remember him calling it Greenville and says, "Well, if you can make it to Greenville, you can make it. You can make it to Harahan." And that was it. I was turned loose out there. I was every bit of 21 years old, turned loose on the bobzine, and drinking from a 2-inch fire hose. Just every trip learning. It felt like back then you would learn as much on that trip as you learned accumulative all the way until that day. So that's how that went for a while, and went well. During that period also, it was probably the most fun I had, because I rode that boat for a while, and then I can remember getting at that point moved around to a lot of different places. So I got kicked off the boat, kicked out of the nest, and at some point they figured out I wasn't very good at flanking, and I got shipped over to Captain Mac Hester, and I didn't realize it till later, but I was scaring people, so he sent me to Mac to learn how to flank. Back then, Mac was one of the hot hands at ACBL, and just a wonderful boat handler. All the Hesters were just, I got a chance to work with all the Hesters, and they're just amazing boat handlers. Captain Mac, great guy, great boat handler. Alvy Hester, Dozer Hester. I got to ride with all those guys, and just tremendous. Got to ride with Mac, Captain Stubby Hudson over on the Elmer. Got to spend some time with him. Captain Bill Shell was retiring. I got sent over. That was kind of a special trip. Carl called me up. I was at home and asked me if I'd go catch the boat with Captain Bill. That it was going to be his last trip, and he was retiring, and wanted to know if I wanted to go ride his last trip with him. So I got to fly up to Cairo and ride Captain Bill Shell's last trip. He was retiring when we got down to the Gulf. So Captain Jimmy Thompson. I mean, oh Lord, the list just goes on. I got to ride with all those guys at the very end of their careers. You start thinking about those guys that had been, some of those guys have been pilots since the 40s, 30s, and 40s and 50s. And I was the young guy that got the benefit from all those guys at the very end of their career. Best boat handlers I've ever seen. Best boat handlers. I've worked with a lot of people, but you just that pedigree of that generation of boat handlers just unmatched, because they did it on just the radar and a couple depth sounders and what they had in their heads.
Any old stories from the 40s or 50s you can share that you've heard over the years?
Yeah, I mean, those guys are all retired or passed away, so we can tell all the stories. But yeah, they were something. I know three guys in particular that I can tell some stories on. Captain Jimmy Thompson and my dad, and Captain Ralph Stubby Hudson were the three amigos. And I can even remember being as a kid, growing up in Destin, they would all come down when I was a little kid to the house for vacation and stuff. So I'd known, at least met a lot of those guys. But the three amigos, I mean, they got into a lot of stuff. There was, masters meetings back there were epic. You get drug along to the masters meetings, and it was open bars, and there not a lot of company business I guess got discussed, but the camaraderie back to that was amazing. You go to the masters meetings, and the chaos those guys would get into was legendary. They would tear it up. I can remember going up with those guys to Jeffersonville, and they had the old holodome up there. They had this round, I don't know if it's still up there. You probably spent some time in Jeff, but they had this old round Holiday Inn, and they used to use me for bait. You know, they'd bring me up there, and I can remember those guys telling me, "Hey, go over there and talk to those girls. Tell them we got a bar tab over here." And I said they'd use me for bait to go bring the girls. A lot of the girls in the office would show up there at Holiday. So there was some mischief. There was some mischief happening there. One thing that I'll never forget was very dear friend of mine, Dave Kalen, Captain Dave Kalen. He was a special guy, young pilot at ACBL, and he had I'd rode the boat with him a few trips, and just a dynamic person, just great personality. And David, he got killed in a weird mountain climbing accident. His brother was an airline pilot in Switzerland, and he'd went over for the christening of a niece or a nephew, and they went hiking up in the mountains up in the Alps, and he slipped and fell off the side of a mountain and passed away. And then his funeral in Jeffersonville was that was a crazy night. Bunch of the old school guys were there. That was that's a night, like, talk about the old timers, I'll never forget. And we missed a good one with that one. Used to run a lot with Shelby House. Shelby and I were young pilots together, so a lot of stories with Shelby. We rode a lot of boats together and got in a lot of mischief. But we played hard, and there was some mischief, and the yawls got used a little bit more back then. But everybody took care of business. The safety records were great. Nobody ever got hurt hardly back then on the well-run boats. And yeah, it was completely different vibe and era back then. But yeah, those old guys. Yeah, you just I'm sure I've missed a few, but that was the golden, to me, that was the golden age of towboat.
Any other highlights of your time at the Sticks up to 94, 95?
Not really. It was a great time. It was a great time to be towboating. I had one of the things, I talked about the plan with my dad. One of the things was, he's like, okay, if you're not gonna go finish college, you're gonna get licensed. You're gonna get as much license as you can get. So during that period of time, I was I had some acquaintances, like going back, and I'll back up another half a. Hang on a second. This is Goat.
How's it going? How you doing, bud?
Good boy. He's bringing me a refill. But yeah, going back to that period of kind of the plan, and then you go back and think about my dad for a second. Back in the early '60s, he was pilot on the J.E. Alquist with Captain W.O. And Captain Mike Watson was a steersman back then. And Mike later on had went to the NOBRA Pilots Association. He was original NOBRA 39. So I knew Mike my whole life, and it was always kind of one of those things that piloting gig was out there. But from kind of that towboat standpoint, there was a lot of licensing and a lot of things that had to happen to get there. So during that period, probably from 90 to 94, I had moved to Louisiana. I started dating my now wife, whose family was in the pilot business. Her dad and my dad were good friends. They used to vacation in Florida. So, I was living with the Watsons. I was living with Bud Watson, and I was riding ships, and during that time, fully committed to the towboat thing, but at the same time going through the process, went and got a master's license, and did the trips, and went and got the first class pilot license. And at the time, they were running ships from New Orleans up to Memphis at the time. So I went and got the first class pilot license up to Memphis. So there was, my off time during those years, was spent a lot riding the deep draft ships and doing the licensing it took to make a run at that someday.
Well, these days, I haven't heard of ships going above Wilkerson Point. It was different back then?
Yeah. It wasn't often, but they had a run, and this was in the early '90s. They had some mini ships that were foreign flag mini ships that were running as far as Memphis. Yeah, they had a run up there. They were doing containers. I think they were doing some other cargoes. So yeah, they were running them as far up as Vice President Island. So that was kind of my hook when I was politicking and trying to make a run at the pilot thing, was to be an applicant that had the license and recency to be able to run up there. So yeah, that was different. You don't see it anymore. There's been a couple of companies threatened to start that run up again, but I think I think that with today's fuel cost and labor cost, I don't think it's productive to run a ship that small, that far up the river for that limited amount of cargo.
Right. Well, tell me about your transition into the Pilots Association, and also I don't know much about them. Aren't there two companies?
There's actually four pilot
Okay.
associations in the Mississippi River. You got the bar pilots that are from the sea buoy to the head of passes, and crescent pilots run from the head of passes up to New Orleans, and then we run from New Orleans to Baton Rouge. There's a 20-mile section in the middle that we share with the crescent pilots. If it's a vessel downbound going into the zone, we do it. If it's a vessel northbound going into the zone, they do it. So we share a few miles, but there's 140 miles or so that we do.
And I know, of course, it's all Jones Act related, but can you tell me the history of the Ship Pilots Associations?
Well, it all started with the bar pilots. They were the first. I think the crescent pilots, they were the second, and I think they started around 1860s, somewhere around the Civil War. And then our association started in 1943. There were, I think it was 7 original members, and they were all heavy tow pilots. Back then, the crescent pilots would actually subcontract to these heavy tow guys to run the ships up to Standard Oil in Baton Rouge, which is now Exxon, because it was so far up there and there wasn't many ships. So when World War II broke out, that work increased to the level where the crescent pilots actually spun the NOBRA pilots off into their own association and helped them and kind of set those guys up in business to be able to handle that work. That was 1943. There was, I think it was 7 of them at the time. In this George today we have 120 guys and gals, and we handle average year around 12,000 ship movements a year.
Have you trained or ridden all the way down to head of pass?
No, I haven't. I need to get down there. Like I said, my grandmother was born down there at the lighthouse, which doesn't exist anymore. But no, I've never been below electric hole. Back in ACBL days, we went down electric hole a couple times, but the coal hole, that's about as far as I made it down there. But so yeah, so that was kind of the deal up until '94 when I left ACBL, and I could already see at ACBL things were changing. They had just started a quality, that was back in the CSX days. They had started a quality program, and I mentioned earlier that I was on the test boat, so I was doing some of that work, going around. They had me going around training some guys, training the trainers type stuff, and then CSX implemented a railroad like quality program, and I did the trainer on that, and I was going around doing some of that. I was running relief captain a little bit, and the writing was kind of on the wall that I was going to wind up in Jeffersonville. And I had this opportunity down in New Orleans, and I got to thinking, man, just got one shot at this. So I took a job on the Hilton Queen of New Orleans casino boat, and I was already living down there, and so yeah, took a pilot's job on the first casino boat on the Mississippi River down there in Louisiana, and that was the transition. Ran it ran it. I ran the Creole Queen a little bit, which was owned by the same company. Did it, I filled in, did some dinner cruises on that, and then around that time started filling in on the American Queen and Delta Queen. So I took a, I was doing some fill-in work over there. So had a pretty full plate, and then completely a transition from doing the barge line stuff into a different role on the passenger boats and casino boats and all that. And really enjoyed my time there doing that. Also, the boat handling wasn't the same. It wasn't the same level of stress and pressure of heavy tow stuff. But then that talking cargo and the pressure of dealing with all the people and the drills and just the stress of having that casino boat, you could have a couple thousand people underneath your feet. So that added a different complexity to the boat handling than having 40 barges of coal or corn or whatever you had in it.
Any highlights of your time on running passenger vessels, and maybe aside from what you've already said, how different of a job was that than what you'd been used to that point?
It was different. One of the things that was nice is, if you think about the pilots, and I was on there strictly as a pilot, but the pilots I worked over there, I had like Captain Bobby Powell and Popeye, and, Bert Suarez was one of the guys I worked with a bunch. And I worked with him on the Hilton Queen of New Orleans. Captain John Davitt was the master of the American Queen back there, and John was funny because Tom, I'm every bit of 25, 26 years old, and when I first met, my first time on the boat, Captain Joe Van Gale that actually called him for the trip, and Captain Van couldn't do it, so he tells him, hey, there's a young towboat guy who's got the big light, who's got the unlimited license, and trying to run for the pilots over here, he'd be a good fit. So they call me, they go fill in. I think it was for a week. So I go down and do the drug test and do the interview and go to Rubenstein Brothers and get fitted for the whole uniform and everything. So I'm up in the wheelhouse first day, and I'm up there in street clothes. And I'm up there, it had a Rekka, had a Deca radar. We call them Rekka Deca radars. It had a Deca radar, and I'm up there, playing with the radar and just, acclimating myself to the bridge. And John Davitt comes up there in street clothes, and he says, "Well, who the F are you?" I was like, "Well," I introduced myself to him. I said, "I'm Dave Shirah." I said, I'm your pilot." So there's no way you're my pilot. I said, "Yeah, they hired me to be the pilot." So he storms out of the wheelhouse and goes down to the Marine Superintendent's office. I guess I was his pilot because I wound up making the trip, but we pull out of there, and evening time around 5 o'clock, I come on watch at 11, and we're coming up through reserve. I was on the boat with Captain Bobby Powell. I relieved Captain Bobby, and Captain John, he's back on the settee. And I guarantee you, and I guarantee what he's thinking is he's going to watch me the whole watch. So I'm coming up, and one of the Seminole boats, old Seminole brave one, Captain Dallas was on there on the back watch, and he had typical Seminole boat, Seminole Warrior, Seminole Brave. They used to fly up and down the river with these 300-foot by 52 coal barges. So you'd meet these guys southbound loaded, they were 12 equal to 25, and northbound they just had 12 little low barges, so depending on which way they were going. But I remember meeting Captain Dallas and agreed on the two, and he recognized my voice, and he asked me to go to the side channel. So we flip up to the side channel, and we're talking back and forth. When Dallas comes down there, and water's running, slides off, and misses the steer at 48, and just about runs over me. I'm on the AQ. I think we had 420 passengers on it plus crew, and I'm up in the bend at 48, and I was trying to hit the bank before he hit me. That's how close I was to the bank over there, and how close he was to me. That first roller coming out of the stern of that boat, broke over the deck of the boat, and I steered around him. We missed each other just by feet. And I just remember, and I forgot about David being on the couch. He was on the couch the whole time. And I'm like, I was telling Captain Dallas, I said, damn, Dallas, I got the boss on the settee back here. It's my first day on the job. You're going to run me over and get me fired. And sure enough, we clear and everything's good. And that's when I realized David's on the couch. David's sitting here. He goes, you weren't bullshitting. He goes, you are a heavy tow pilot. I said, yes, sir. I said, kinda. couldn't tell it by that, but yeah, I said, and we talked a little bit, and he wadeered me a little bit about where I rode and what I was on and everything, and from then on it was good. But yeah, Captain David and I, he's retired down in Florida. We remain great friends all the way till now. Based on those days back on the AQ.
And how different was, or maybe is today, the pay scale for heavy tow pilots versus passenger vessels?
Well, I was making $212 a day at ACBL on the big boats, and that gets back into some friction. But when you come up over there, and get turned loose, they had me on and that's part of the reason I left ACBL. I was an Ohio River number 4 pilot. Although all I ever rode was the lower mostly on the 3-bangers, and I was making $212 a day. And the way, and I understand what they did back then. Back then, if they brought you off deck and brought you through the steersman's program and everything, you were gonna eat some of that Ohio River pay until they kind of figured they'd gotten their investment back on you before they started moving you up. So that was a point of contention, and that's a lot of the reason I left ACBL at the time too. Is like when around that time, they had just done the Valley Line acquisition, and part of the agreement with that was ACBL agreed to bring all the Valley Line guys over at their pay scale that they were making at Valley Line. Well, Valley Line turns around and makes everybody over there a number 1 pilot. So every one of those guys come in at number 1 pilot's pay, the ACBL. So that caused a lot of friction that you had guys like me making. I think back then number 1 pilot's pay was like $350 a day, something like that. So I was making almost $150 a day, call it $130 a day less than those guys that had come in. So there was a lot of friction around that time just over pay scales, because I don't blame Valley Line. They took care of their guys at the end, but it was there was definitely it added to the friction of the ACBL Valley Line acquisition for sure.
And what was the pay on the passenger vessels?
Around the 350 mark. I think I want to say the Queen of New Orleans, I think the pilot pay on that thing was like $3.25 a day back then. So that was a pretty significant pay raise coming off the towboats to that from what I was making. And then if you went and picked up a 3-hour trip on the Creole Queen, I think they paid $80 cash for that one on top of it. And then I think the AQ for the pilot pay was about the same, right around that 350, kind of around number 1 pilot's pay on a heavy tow. So that was good. Back to the ACBL Valley Line thing. A funny story I tell is I was at home. I was on my off days, and this is right after the Valley Line acquisition when they were still separating the ACBL crews and the Valley Line crews. They weren't exactly sure how it was going to go, just because two legendary companies on the river, and everybody was. The Valley Line guys were proud Valley Line guys, and the ACBL guys were proud Valley Line ACBL guys. So I'm at home, and Carl Cannon calls me. Notice he's at the root of a lot of these stories. But Captain Carl calls me. I'm off on days. He says, "Look, I need you to fly to Memphis and catch the KD. We had the pilot on there has had a family emergency or something, has to get off, and I need you to, because I just need you to get on it and ride it to the Gulf." I'm like, "Okay, well, I can do that." So I got on a Northwest Airlines. Back then, you flew Northwest from Northwest Florida to Memphis, and of course, usual deal. You travel all day, and I think I got on the thing at 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening, and Never been on a boat as nice as that. I'm like, oh my God, this thing's amazing. You know, the Miss KD. So I come on there and relieve the captain and watch change and everything, and pretty hostile. Like he wasn't very friendly, wasn't very happy to have me on there. You know, you know, 20, at that point, probably a 23-year-old, pilot, and looked every bit of it and everything. So anyway, I relieve him, and I'm, first couple of turns I make with this thing, I'm like, man, this thing is amazing. Just amazing. You could just tell how good a boat it was. So I get down to Helena and I pull her up on the point and put a little power to it, pull it down on the right hand bridge pier, and I just right before I went under the green lights, I just pulled off the right hand pier and put it under the green lights. He comes storming up in the wheelhouse in his tidy whities. He is pissed off. He's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Well, I'm going at the green lights, the Helena Bridge. It's perfect." He's like, "No, what are you doing over here?" And I'm like, "Well, we all the ACBL guys run the center span." I'm like, "Hell, I've never even run that other span. I don't even know how to set up for it." And he was furious, just wouldn't stop. And finally he'd got my dander up, and I'm like, "Look, guy," I said, "I'm sorry that I got you upset about this and everything, but I can't help it. I'm an ACBL guy. We all run the center span." And he just wouldn't stop. And I finally told him, I said, "Look," I said, "if y'all hadn't hit the Vicksburg Bridge so many times, we wouldn't have you having this conversation, because y'all still be Valley Line, and ACBL wouldn't have bought you on." That was it. But he's back down the stairs. I don't think he said another word to me until I got off the thing in Harahan a couple days later.
Well, fill me in on your transition from passenger vessels finally up into the Ship Pilots Association.
Yeah. That kind of happened. That happened in '95, and I didn't really expect it. I didn't really expect it to happen either. I thought it was going to be a lot longer. I had the license. Kind of by that time, I'd met some people I knew through my dad and through family. I knew some of those guys already. Like I said, I was dating a NOBRA pilot's daughter, Civi Ryder, at the time. Civi, she's my wife now, but we were. She was pretty resigned to, and I was resigned to, that was a possibility. But we were probably looking at doing passenger vessels or doing stuff for quite a while, because if you think about what had happened in the towing industry, the same thing had happened in the ship pilot industry. They made pilots in 1980, and they made pilots again. So they went 10 full years without making a single person. They went from 80 to 90 and didn't make anybody. And then they made like 20 guys in 90. And the train of thought was that they probably wouldn't do it again for another 10 years after 1990. And by that time, the pecking order and all that stuff, it was definitely not a definite. It was a possibility, but it was something that was kind of, to us at the time, way over the horizon. Like, we don't count on this anytime soon, if at all. But kind of the same thing happened in the shipping industry. The ship pilot industry has happened in the towboat industry. All of a sudden, when you don't train new people and don't take in new people for that long, all of a sudden you wind up in a deficit. So, in 1995, they started talking about having an election, and at the time they were talking about maybe 10 men, 12 men, and at that level of bringing in people, I was out. I would have been another couple of elections down. Well, business picked up, and things started progressing. Like, they got super busy on the ships to the point of barely able to clear to work. So it went from making a dozen people, and I think 16, 14, 16 were some numbers. And then they started talking about 16, 18 number. And then by the time they got around to having an election, and to do that, they have to go through the pilot fee commission, and there's a bunch of steps that have to get approved for manpower increases and a tariff to pay the new people. So it's a very complicated procedure with industry. But all of a sudden, the number is 24, and the election happens, and boom, I got elected in. I'm like, wow, that's just crazy, because it was something I dreamed about, and it was something I'd worked towards, but had no idea that it was imminent when it happened. But then they turned around, and one group sued another group in industry, and next thing you know, the election happened, and I was elected in, but it was all held up in court, and actually went all the way to the Louisiana Supreme Court. So, the whole time that, it's going through the different appellates and all the appeals and all the way to Supreme Court, you're sitting here going, okay, am I, I'm elected in, but, you can't start, and it's not real, because there was a chance they could have taken back that tariff and taken back that agreement, and we'd have been basically kicked out. So that was a very stressful moment, going through that whole process. And it's kind of my first time watching this legal, political mess that is worked through the process.
How does that work? Is on the electoral committees, and does each organization have their own?
Each organization has its own, and one of the misconceptions about what we do is that we're somehow employees or something like that. Like when you look at a ship pilot, we're uninsured. The reason our organizations are set up like they are is because of the way liability works and everything. An employee, with the amount of liability that we take on as an individual, would never work. So each one of us is its own little corporation of that individual. So my piloting business is me alone. The association, all they do is collect, dispatch me to the ships and collect my money for me. And then there's a separate commission that provides oversight to make sure that I'm, drug tested, and make sure that I'm in compliance with my physical and training and all that stuff. So, we don't work for the association. We're all independent contractors because we're uninsurable. Nobody will insure us. So each one of us takes on that liability on behalf of the state and the ship as an individual.
Well, and I've heard over the years, of course, some news about increased salaries and such things. Not having known the insurance side of that sort of puts that in perspective for me. But back in '95, what was the jump in compensation from passenger vessels? I mean, how much better off were you, and what sort of schedule were you working? How is that on call, and has it changed through today?
Yeah, it was less. It was less than twice, probably. It was less than double, probably, what the passenger vessel schedule was. But it was a completely different animal, because, like, once you understand it, we're all independent contractors. It's like if they went and published your plumber's gross salary before his expenses and all the stuff he has to take care of, you'd say, "Damn, I want to be my plumber." But by the time he nets it all down and everything, it's still good, but it's not as, the numbers aren't as heady as when they publish it in the newspaper. They'll publish an independent pilot the gross, but they definitely don't take into account of the business expenses that an individual has to take to maintain and administrate a business. So I'll leave that at that. But it's definitely a different. It's going from being an employee where most things are taken care of to being an independent contractor.
How are each of these organizations compensated?
By the ship. So that's another misconception about our business. Everybody somehow thinks that the state or somebody's paying us. We only handle foreign flag ships. So when a foreign flag ship comes into the port, any port, and I'll say this too, that the pilotage laws go all the way back to the Continental Congress. Some of the very first laws they passed at the Continental Congress was pilotage laws, because back then taxes were collected only through tariffs. There weren't income taxes. There was only property taxes and tariffs. So they instituted pilotage laws back in colonial days, and every country in the world has the same thing. so that every foreign ship has to register through the pilotage to come into the port, and then that's how the state knows to go collect their tariffs off those goods and cargoes. So really, if you go back all the way to the Continental Congress, that's how far the pilotage laws go back to. But so when a foreign flag ship comes into the port, they have a local agent, and that local agent who secures our services to bring that ship to its destination, and then back out again, and then that agent pays the bill to the individual pilot that did the job. That's how the ticket works, and then we pull all that money, and that's how we get our compensation. So it's 100% performance based, and it's 100% based on foreign ships engaged in foreign commerce coming into the United States. That's who pays our bills.
And what kind of on-call schedule do you have?
We work 7 days on, 7 days off on a straight rotation.
And that's any ship anywhere in that, from maybe mile 88 to 230?
Yeah, it's never the same job twice. It's when you get to be first on turn, you get the next job, and then that job is what it is. And then when you finish that job, you call in your finish time, and you go to the back of the rotation and work your way back to the front again. And we'll average 40 turns a day. Sometimes on a fog day, we might do 65 or 70 turns. And when we have days like that, we have to call in guys from the off watch to cover the extra work.
And what are the mileposts for each of the, I guess, Crescent and then NOBRA?
Sea buoy to 0, 0 to 90, and then 90 to 234. And actually, we go all the way up to Lum Light, which is mile 300 at the Louisiana-Mississippi state line. But it's been a while since we've had a vessel going up there to foreign flag.
And how does the training process work? I guess when you're, if I can use the same terminology, cut loose for your own first job.
Well, when we bring an apprentice into the group, they're already a licensed mariner, and they already have a pilot's license. So they've already gone through that whole education process. There's been one of the things. There's been a transition starting around 2000. We phased in education requirements. The state mandated that, so we increased our level of education from just the Coast Guard license, the way it was back in the old days. Starting in 2000, there was a few years where it was the Coast Guard licensure, in addition to an associate's degree, and then it was the Coast Guard license in addition to a 4-year degree for a few years. And now we've phased fully into requiring a 4-year degree from a maritime academy and the unlimited third mate ocean license that goes along with it.
Well, you've mentioned in previous conversations with me that the licensing process is a little bit different from when you did it versus what GOAT is now doing. Fill me in on those differences.
Oh yeah. That, like I said, when I came up, everything, from a hawse piper, everything was, of course, I've got a lower level license, and so I started with a second class operator, went to first class operator, went to the master of rivers, and then got the first class pilotage on top of that. So that was my path back in the hawse pipe days. But I've watched my sons both go through this process. My oldest son, Cannon, he went through the Massachusetts Maritime Academy, MMA, in Buzzards Bay, Massachusetts. And then my youngest son, Goat, he's Dayton's his real name. We call him Goat because he's, not because he's the greatest of all time, but he was born with a hard head and a stinking ass. So that nickname stuck with him at about 6 months old, and he keeps it today. But he's at the Great Lakes Maritime Academy up in Michigan, and he's next week. There's some commotion going on downstairs. Next week he starts his licensing process. So they do, I think it's 7 sections for the third mate unlimited ocean license. It's a 4-year school. Both schools had their own school ship, so they sailed school cruises for 3 of them. Cannon for his commercial cruise with Jackson offshore in the Gulf. Goat for his commercial cruise actually went in the river with Reliant Towing with Dave Abney and Jeremy Tardy over there. They took him in over there, and he actually got to do his commercial cruise on a push boat in the on the Western Rivers, mostly on the lower, but he did some upper and some Illinois stuff too. So back to the licensing thing. So they both go through a process where they, celestial navigation, deck nav, nav general, terrestrial plot, but it's all international stuff. I was watching Goat a couple of days ago go through some celestial navigation exercises and plots, and I'm like, man, thank God I didn't have to do that. I don't know if I've got the horsepower to go through that process, but yeah, that's the system now. I think that'll remain the system. Coming up, when I was coming up, maritime academies weren't even on the radar. But I think I think for a young person now, I think it's a viable method to get where you're going, because if you go towboating without an education, go into office, and I was faced with this when I was looking for office at ACBL, you're going to have to at some point take a pause in your career and go finish your education to at the level of education that's required at most of the companies these days. So I think it's a good program, but it's a full 4 years. MMA, Mass Maritime, they're kind of focused from the sea buoy out to the ocean. I've been very, very pleasantly surprised with Great Lakes, because the Great Lakes program is all inland. They sail in the Great Lakes and all the rivers, the Detroit River and all the connecting rivers up in the Great Lakes and everything. So 100% of their program is inside the sea buoy. So yeah, really, really happy with that program. Mass Maritime was very military. It was a lot of marching. It was morning formation every day, room inspections and all that. Where Great Lakes, they kind of don't focus so much on the military and discipline aspect of it, more just on the practical seamanship side of it.
Well, I look forward to hopefully one day speaking to Dayton on this very program. Maybe we'll tell a few stories about you haven't shared yet. But in the meantime, you mentioned that you owned and operated a few boats that kind of came to an end during Katrina. Tell me about that whole experience.
Yeah, that was Captain Billy Watson. He used to own Watson Marine, and we come across with North Star went out of business. There was some boats left. Peanut Hollinger had them stored up on the at his shipyard. So we went up there and looked at them, and eventually bought the boats and sold 2 of the boats were the old Allied boats, those triple screw 5600s. We sold those to South America, and wound up with the Pretty Page was one of them, which was the old Trade Winds, which was kind of coming back full circle for me to actually own a boat that my dad was captain on. And it was a very very that boat everybody recognizes one of the Art Deco boats, and everybody recognized those boats. But unfortunately, she was too far gone. We wound up not refurbing that one, but the old John B. Secker, we refurbed it. That became the Catherine Watson. In the meantime, we bought another boat. That was the David Shirah. That one's named after my wife. And then we had the old Indian Princess, 1940 Dravo built boat, and we refurbed that. That was Captain Billy Watson. We also operated a few boats for ACBL at the time. Had to Mel Oliver for a while before we turned her back in. She had some mechanical issues before the Mel Oliver accident, actually. But a couple of the ACBL boats, we bare boated a few boats for them in the process. Had a good time, had a good run. Mostly like I said, we worked for ACBL with a couple. I think we had at one point 3 or 4 boats on charter to Kirby, and did some Kirby contracts, and had a good time. Learned a lot. The aches and pains of being a small boat operator. I think at one point we had 5, 6 boats operating. It gotten up to about 100 crew members and support staff. So Katrina hit, and it put the pretty page up on the seawall at our office. We had an office up in the Harvey Canal, and she sank on the seawall. And then really kind of what got us was a combination of crewing costs and just the trauma of trying to do business post Katrina and operate the boats in that environment. And at the same time, the value of the boats went up. It kind of started to have a few squabbles in the ownership group, and it was just time to exit stage left. So we sold the boats, and thankfully SCF took a couple of them, Kirby took a couple of them, and then we sold 1 boat to South America, and most of the crew members wound up transferring with the boats to the new owners. So got out of the deal with hair, skin, and teeth, and learned a valuable lesson in boat operations. You think some things about boats until you own a couple of them, and they'll teach you the rest of it. I promise you.
Without a doubt. What was the Mel Oliver incident? I'm not familiar with that.
That was a pretty famous incident that happened. I'm trying to remember the year. It would have been probably late 90s, early 2000s. It was after 2000. It was an incident where the Mel Oliver, the captain, had gotten off, and there was a steersman on board. Steersman was operating the boat without a captain on board, and had a collision with a ship in the harbor, and barge got sank. So that was a pretty significant injury accident that had a lot of repercussions as far as regulations. Anybody go look up the NTSB report and the date on that. The interesting thing about the Mel Oliver accident, it was one of the first ones that had been kind of post AIS and post Vessel Traffic Center. The whole thing had been kind of voice recorded. So they've got all the voice recordings, and they've got all the overlays and everything else like that. So and everybody can go on there. It's a well-documented incident. Everybody can go on there and kind of make their own opinion about it.
Well, you alluded earlier to a feeling or maybe some opinions about Coast Guard and NTSB involvement in the industry these days. What changes have you seen over the years, positively or negatively?
Well, I think the whole industry has evolved. If you look at subchapter M, and you look at everybody doing risk analysis paperwork, and everybody just being in a safety system, I think those are all positives. And I think the Coast Guard has driven a lot of that. So, and I'm not here to bash the Coast Guard. It's just the culture. I think the culture has changed over the years, where there's definitely a lot more exposure for a captain these days, or any wheelman, to oversight and action taken on licensing and everything else like that. They definitely hold industry to a much higher standard than they were in the 70s, when, if you think back to early 1970s, when there wasn't even a license required to operate a towboat, to today's subchapter M environment that we live in now with all the NTSB oversight. It's definitely we're a lot closer to airline pilots these days than we were the unlicensed mariners of 40 or 50 years ago.
Well, what do you see? What do you think of today's industry, and what do you see in the future for it?
Well, I think fatigue. I think the fatigue issue is probably going to be in the forefront going forward. I think I've worked a lot on ocean-going vessels now, and worked a lot with 3-watch systems. My son Cannon's on he did a lot of time in the Gulf with a larger bridge team system. I think that's the thing I see going forward. I think you're liable to see more and more pressure, especially when you look back at what's happening in the trucking industry now. You know, if you look at what's happened in the trucking industry. They used to drive 12 hours a day, and now they have that staggered system. I think they can do 12 or 14 the first day, but after a couple of days on the road, I think they're down to 8 hours a day. So I definitely see pressure coming from oversight on fatigue issues. And if you go to reading NTSB reports, a lot of times fatigue's in the forefront of those reports. So I don't know if inland will ever get to a 3-watch system, but I think fatigue is one of the things that'll continue to be watched and monitored and improved upon going forward. I think that in the next generation equipment, one of the things I've been involved with is early on, back in the late 90s, I was involved in the ITS 100 program, the bow boat, Edison's West bow boat project. Got a patent on that in 2000. I was working with Kongsberg Simrad out of Egersund, Norway, Jan Mikkelsen, and the Schwest group got involved with that. We formed a company called Rivertech, and we built the ITS 100. We broke a bunch of towing records with it. We were in a trial with ACBL at the time. That was back with the Floyd Goodman. I don't know if you remember that. That was probably 2001 or so. ACBL actually went bankrupt right in the middle of that trial, and Edison Schwest pulled the equipment back and started using the ITS 100 down in their shipyards in Homa and La Rose, not St. Rose, but La Rose. And I guess, I'm trying to think when it was. We actually pulled it out and did a second trial with ACBL with the I'm trying to remember which boat that was. It was one of the newer AEP boats. That was a few years ago. And again, broke a bunch of records with it, and was having success up and down the river. And ACBL went broke on us again and wound up shutting that trial down a second time. So I'm 0 for 2 on the ITS 100. And that's some interesting technology. It uses the bow boat, but it uses a radio link back to the main towboat, and the Buckeye State was what we did the last trial with, and uses a radio link back to the towboat, and then it uses a joystick, basically a DP0 joystick system, which takes over all the controls of the towboat plus the bow steering module, and uses them all as one composite unit. And by doing that, you move the pivot point from the steering coupling anywhere you want it, but we ran it at the center of the tow where the bow steering module and the towboat ran 1-to-1 up and down the river. Like I said, amazing. We had amazing results with it. We went 6 long, went 36, went 42 with it. Successfully brought 42 loads down with it. Bow steering modules, 2,400 horsepower plus a 6,000 on the towboat. And at 42, we were nowhere near capacity. She would have done 49, no problem, 7x6 southbound. And I think there was probably some meat on the bone beyond that, but I think everybody started questioning, if it's smart to go past 49 barges southbound. But that system definitely showed some potential. Hopefully we can revisit that in the future going forward and bring that technology to the market, because if you look at the state-of-the-art towboats right now, most of the companies are building the exact same boats they were building in the 40s and 50s. It's just everything is digital, but it's the same systems. It's if you were to go build a brand new 6,000 horsepower towboat right now, it's not much different than Dravo number 39 that came out that revolutionized the towboat. You're talking about a hull with a Western River stern. You're talking about a couple cork nozzles, a 5-bladed wheel, 2 sets of flanking rudders and a steering rudder. The only thing that's changed was back then everything was was low volume, was high volume, low pressure, and everything was, pneumatic governors. And if you were to build that boat today, it's just about the exact same boat. You might have some suspension on the houses that reduce vibration. It's the exact same systems. They're just electronic now, and they're high pressure, low volume. They've just flipped the hydraulics around on all the operating systems and everything. But those boats haven't changed a whole lot. So, we've been working through. I've got a partner, Greg Castleman, and another guy we've been working with, Darren Monzingo, who's a Kings Point guy. We've been working on some newer designs on this bow steering module, remote propulsion concept. So hopefully some things like that can help to reduce some of the fatigue factors. I mean, one of the things that bothered me then and still bothers me now is, if you think about a towboat pilot that's running the lower, he's 12 hours a day on sticks, 6 and 6. That's a lot. And we really haven't done, there's so many, I've been exposed to so many technologies out from the Gulf and some of the other projects I've worked on that, we could actually start to help these mariners with some technology. But the towboat industry has been very reluctant to step out there and be the first one to adopt these new technologies.
It's very interesting. I'm definitely curious to see where that goes in the coming years. But we've been about an hour and a half now. Do you have anything else you'd like to share before we call this one?
No. I think that covers quite a bit of it. I appreciate the invitation to come on and talk, and look forward to maybe finishing up. We kind of got through a couple zones of it. I'll make it, and you'd asked previously too to make some introductions to the rest of the family. I'll get you introduced to Dave Sr. and Goat, and maybe Cannon's my shy one. We might even be able to talk Cannon to coming out of the woodwork at some point.
We'll make it happen. I'll be here.
Okay, good talking to you.
Thanks a lot, Cap. You too.
Yeah, Merry Christmas.
This has been a production of Where You At Studios, LLC.